今天这一期呢，我请到的嘉宾是你们的富爸爸 Robert Kiyosaki 的税务策略师 Tom Wheelwright。
Robert Kiyosaki is known for having 1.2 billion debt, and why is he not panic about that?
Here's the rule on debt. If you're afraid of the debt, it's because
Right. 之前呢，我就被观众批判过哈，因为我说川普的这个资产量级啊，竟然还要上税，这个非常不符合逻辑。
Did you use that $916 million loss to avoid paying personal federal income taxes?
Of course I do. Of course I do. And so do all of her donors.
那我现在呢，也依然坚持我的说法。
he would have had to have the worst tax advisor in the world to pay tax.
今天呢，我就跟 Tom 一起来颠覆一下大家对于税法的认知。那 Tom 作为顶尖的税务策略师呢，就来给大家全面解释一下，为什么业余的投资人喜欢研究赚钱，专业的投资人喜欢研究税法。那他又是用什么样的逻辑让你们的富爸爸实现零上税？在川普的报税单上面，他又发现了点什么？
If you ask a really good accountant, okay, tell me what's 2 plus 2, the answer is, what would you like it to be?
交税光荣这说法，我个人觉得是非常错误的哈。那说它是个骗局也不为过。这一期文字稿的链接呢，就在描述栏里面，大家可以点进去看。
This is the biggest gaslighting event in the whole American history. Like, how did the government even make people feel like, okay, paying tax is something that's actually moral, and not paying tax is something that's immoral, and then people have to accept that, and that's something that people should do, and people would do and be happily doing it. Like, how does that whole gaslighting thing came together?
That's a fascinating question, Joy, because it's been over a lot of years for that to happen.
Yeah.
Remember when George H.W. Bush ran for office his second term, he said, read my lips, no new taxes. And then he increased taxes and didn't get elected the second term. And that's because even back in the 1980s, 1990s, nobody liked taxes. So this is a very recent development, actually, that people are going, I really believe that it stems from when the wealthy become so wealthy that they have multiple beach homes and homes overseas, and they push the asset prices up so much so that it's not available to the average person.
So it's a jealous problem.
I think there is. I think there's absolutely well, wait a minute. Why are they, why do they get to be so rich and I'm barely making it? We didn't have an income tax for the first 150 years or so. In 1913, there was a war about to start, World War I, and there was a perceived need for taxes. We'd had an income tax during the Civil War. Lincoln had enacted an income tax. Historically, though, we'd lived off of tariffs. So our primary revenue had been tariffs. We were a net exporter, not a net importer. So we lived off of tariffs. 1913, somehow they got the public to ratify the 16th Amendment. Not quite sure why. The reason it happened was because it only affected a very small portion of people. So you had to make like the equivalent today of like $8 million a year to pay any income tax at all when the 16th Amendment was enacted. So everybody goes, well, yeah, it's great. Tax the rich, right? Nothing's changed in over 100 years. Nothing's changed. Tax the rich. We're good with that as long as you don't tax me. Actually, employees didn't start to be taxed until after World War II. So you never got taxed on your employment income. And in fact, so the rich were taxed, the employees were not taxed. And from 1945 to 2025, things completely flipped. So now employees are taxed high and the rich are not taxed. So it has gone the other direction.
So there was a time that in the history, 1944, the tax rate was up to 94%, which is crazy to think about. Like compared to today, is like the highest is like what, 30 something, and then corporate tax is like 20, a little bit above 20. So for 90%,
yeah, but nobody paid that tax rate.
Exactly.
Understand that there were so many exemptions and so many ways around it that Nobody paid that rate.
I heard, just don't quote me on this, but I heard there's a number that even though the tax rate is at 94, but people are actually paying somewhere around like 18-ish, just, in
That
general.
would not surprise me. That would not surprise me at all.
之前我就说过很多次哈，大家不要把这个税法当做一个负担，应该把它看作一个投资指南。因为呢，这个是一个政府怎么样规划社会资源分配的方式。那税务减免越高的地方，说明政府越希望你把钱往这地方去投。
Beginning back in the 1950s and John F. Kennedy in the 1960s especially, the government started using taxes as incentives. Instead of just collecting revenue, they actually used it to incentivize certain activities. John F. Kennedy used it to incentivize building manufacturing plants and adding manufacturing equipment. We had the investment tax credit. That was really the first big incentive. And then we got more incentives. Ronald Reagan used incentives for the real estate market. He was very big in real estate in 1981. 82, 84, all of those were pro-real estate. And then we saw Bill Clinton used the tax law for different incentives. And then we had Joe Biden use incentives for renewable energy. So what they found was that it does work. I mean, people will they will tend to put their money where they don't have as much risk. And if you take the risk away by sharing that risk, which is what the government does, if the government's sharing your risk, then you feel like, well, it's okay. It's like, for example, best example is oil and gas. So oil and gas is very risky. You can't see it. You don't know if you can get it. You don't know what the price is going to be. It's a very risky investment. And yet people will do it a lot because of the tax incentive. And for that matter, think about why people put money into 401k. They put money into 401k because the bait for a 401k is the tax deduction. That's the bait.
What other sectors do you see that the government is trying to incentivize and trying to let the investors move into that direction?
So think about what the government wants to do, right?
Yeah.
So they want to increase employment. So they incentivize big corporations. That's why big corporations have such a low tax rate. They want to incentivize food production. So they incentivize agriculture. Agriculture probably has the best of all the tax incentives. Okay, they want to incentivize business in general, right? And they incentivize business because that's what moves the economy, produces goods and services. So they're incentivizing business in general. They always incentivize energy because energy is what we run on, and then they incentivize certain other things that are kind of smaller things. But for example, besides real estate, for example, they'll incentivize research and development. We have research and development tax credits. They'll incentivize, there's an incentive for hiring veterans, right, in the tax law. There's lots of incentives. There's literally thousands of incentives in the tax law. A lot of them are little known, but the big ones are really hard assets. Hard assets being, actual assets like business, real estate, agriculture, and energy.
Trump is always, like these Republicans are always trying to reduce the tax on the corporation side. So that goes back to one of the concepts called trickle-down economics. So for the trickle-down economics and then the tax combined, how does that incentivize the economy? How do you think the investors should ride a wave?
Trickle-down economics 是从供给端带动经济的一个宏观经济逻辑哈。那里根就是这个概念的代表性人物，也是共和党偏向的这个政策。那这个概念呢，就是说通过优先刺激顶层经济主体，比如说像大企业呀、富人呐、投资人呐，来带动整个经济增长。那通过给上层的经济主体在税收上面进行减免呐、放松管制啊，鼓励自由市场，推动企业家精神，让企业扩大业务、雇佣员工，长期看来呢，整个社会的财富呢就会增长。这种增长的模式呢，最终也会传导到中产阶级和低收入群体身上。那所以它就 trickle down 嘛。那但是呢，这里面有一个争议哈，它就来了。 这个呢是一个比较漫长的过程，那因为需要各个行业在供给端进行运营上面的改变，那事实上是没有办法快速的去解决产业链最底端的这些人的实际生活质量的。那这个呢就让民主党这种可以直接解决需求端资金问题的这种大政府政策得到了大众的支持。但是呢，我觉得这话题里面其实有一个被忽略的点哈，就是这个 trickle down 它不是一个对错的问题，那关键是在于它有没有在合适的时间、合适的结构里面去运作。那比如说呢，从教育方面，那至少要高度普及经济学常识哈，那这样呢才能有一个广泛的认知基础，那才能有理性的讨论空间。那所以更实际的角度应该是呢，比如说从医疗啊、基础设施啊和教育层面去支持普通人建立等待经济变化的这么一个耐心。那不过共和党当政的时代呢，川普在税务上的这个政策会对美国的经济格局产生什么样的影响呢？
Well, so first of all, what Trump's trying to do this term is really lower the taxes on manufacturers, because everything he's doing is trying to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. because we shipped it offshore. We've done it for years and years and years. We shipped all of our manufacturing offshore. We don't even manufacture all of our missiles onshore. All the parts of our missiles don't get manufactured onshore, which is shocking, that we don't manufacture our defense onshore. And so, the tariffs, the tax rates, those are all to bring manufacturing back. That is the number one goal there, is to bring the manufacturing back. Whether you like that or not, that is the goal. And so I think that's kind of the emphasis right now. Corporate taxes, the challenge with corporate taxes, they used to be 35%. Prior to Trump, they're 35%, which if you add state taxes was closer to 45%, which we were the highest in the world on corporate taxes. Remember, we have to compete with other countries. And so other countries have taxes on their imports that they don't have on their exports, called value-added taxes. Every other country has a value-added tax. We're the only one without one. Okay, so if we ship, say, an airplane, Boeing ships an airplane to France, there's a value-added tax. If Air France ships an airplane to American Airlines, there's no value-added tax. Okay, so, and that's a 22% tax on the total purchase price. That is a very large tax. And so, the idea is, let's make it easier for corporations to be in America. Let's give U.S. corporations an advantage, not a disadvantage vis-a-vis the rest of the world. That's the idea. I think Trump would like to bring the corporate tax rate for manufacturers in the U.S. down to 15%. And I think they'll probably do it. I think it'll be an odd way to do it. You won't see it in the tax rates, but it will effectively give them a 15% rate.
看过《富爸爸穷爸爸》这本书的观众都知道，这个里面呢有一个很著名的4个象限，就是雇员、自由职业者或者小企业主那大企业还有投资人。但这不只是4个身份还是4种不同的思维方式。那更重要的，它是4种不同的行为模式，最终导致了4种不同的纳税等级。而这4种纳税等级就决定了你最终的财富等级。Would you start looking at your poop？ 你厕所清理完了。好的。
The way I look at it is the government gives you a choice, right? So what you don't have a choice in is the government's your partner. Whether you like it or not, they're your partner in your job, they're your partner in your business, they're your partner in investing. You don't get to choose whether they're your partner. What you get to choose is, are you a silent partner with the government, or are you an active partner with the government? Most employees and small business owners, they don't want to deal with taxes. I'm just going to pay it, go on my way. I don't want the IRS to hassle me. I just want it done. I don't want to even think about it. But they also don't want to be active investors, right? I mean, you teach a lot about active investing. They don't want to do that. They want to say, hey, I'm going to give my money to a financial planner, or I'm going to buy ETFs of the S&P 500. I'm going to do something that's completely passive. I don't really have to worry about, hey, the stock market always goes up in the end, so I'm fine. And they don't want to deal with it. So that's good 80% of the public. Is I think they just don't want to deal with it, and they don't have the education to deal with it. But remember, we always have a choice, and a choice comes to how willing are we to get educated, and then once we're educated, how willing are we to do the things that the government wants us to do? So tax incentives are things the government wants you to do. That's why they're incentivizing it. They want you to do it. So if they want you to function like a big business, you don't have to be a big business. You just have to behave like a big business. They want you to behave like a big business because then you'll grow and you'll get bigger. So they want you to do that because they want more employment. They want more jobs. They want more commerce. And so they'd like you to do more. On the investor side, they'd like more real estate. They'd like real estate to be built. They'd like, they need housing. They'd like food to be produced. They'd like energy to be produced. So all of these things in your I quadrant, Kiyosaki's I quadrant, those are for people who really want to do those things that the government incentivizes. And the incentives, as you know, are enormous. I mean, the government can end up paying up to 40 to 50% of your down payment on a building, for example.
Silent partner of the government is basically being punished for being lazy, basically, and not trying to learn more things to become a better investor.
I prefer to say you're being rewarded for being active than being punished for being lazy, but the result's the same.
很遗憾的是，绝大多数的人是不会达到 investor 这个财富级别的，并不是因为什么阶级固化呀、财富垄断之类的这些呢，其实都是在找外在因素哈，是比较被动的，是不可控的。可是我想传递的这个理念是想让大家去思考，那我们怎么样用现有的这个资源去主动解决问题，把解决问题的主动权呢掌握在我们自己的手里面，而不是把这个重点放在不可控的因素上面。那之所以我说绝大多数人是不会达到4个象限里面这 investor 级别呢，是因为大家对于这个 investor 的角色的定义不够具体。那绝大多数人对于投资人的定义呢，就是说做出了把自己的钱换成金融资产这行为的人就是投资人。但是我认为哈，真正的投资人的这个身份不是以行为为起点来定义的，而以思维为起点来定义的。对于社会系统和经济系统的理解程度才是决定了投资人等级的这个核心标准。如果你可以理解政府设定的这个游戏规则呢，那么政府会为你的投资行为而买单，成为投资过程中变相的一种投资杠杆。那能够利用到这一点的人呢，才符合这4个象限里面 investor 的定义。
This is the part that's starting to get a little controversial. People are like, I invest in stock, I'm an investor. Yes, but you're an investor from you're outsider investor. And then what we're doing and what you've been focusing on are the insider investors. Like, tell me about why the tax law make life easier or make the opportunity better for the insider investors.
Well, if you think about it, when you buy stock, you're really buying a derivative. You're not actually investing in the company. You're just buying stock from somebody else, some other investor. You're not buying it from the company, right? So you're not investing in the company. What you're doing is you're basically investing in yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And the government will incentivize it if you do it through a 401k or retirement plan, something like that. And they're okay with that. But you're really not producing anything. And basically what it comes down to is the government rewards producers and punishes consumers. Consumers pay all the tax. If you save money or spend money, you pay tax on that money. If you reinvest the money in a business or you reinvest the money in actual hard assets, hard meaning the tangible assets that you can touch, like oil and gas, like renewable energy, like food, agriculture, cattle, you reinvest it in housing or real estate, you do it, then you're actually creating something. You're a producer. And it's really that simple. It's producers versus consumers.
Outsider investors, they invest in stock, which is a product that people consume.
It's one level down from the actual business, right? If you formed the company, right, you'd be investing in the actual business. But if you're an investor, you've now invested in the investment. And so it's one step removed from the actual production level. And the more removed you get from production level, the less incentives there are.
Okay, so give us a using number. Give us an example. Let's say somebody investing 1 million in, let's say, the private market. And let's just say you use real estate. That's the easier example. Let's say $1 million in real estate. How much is this investor potentially being taxed? Let's say this person is in, I don't know, Texas. And then the same person invests in stock market. And then what's, from a reward perspective, how much is there left for this investor?
Well, so think about, first you have to think, where'd the $1 million came from? You had to earn that $1 million somewhere. Okay, that $1 million is going to be taxed when you earn it, right? Generally speaking, all income is taxable. So if you take that money and put it in the stock market, you have to actually have earned probably $1.5 million to end up with $1 million. To invest in the stock market, because there's no deduction for putting the money into the stock market. Now, let's say you put that same money into real estate, and we have bonus depreciation as an example, or you put it into oil and gas, you put it in agriculture. The results are roughly the same. What's going to happen is that $1 million that you earned, the tax deduction for investing it is roughly equal to the amount of money you earned. So you'll pay no tax on that $1 million. So what you end up with is, in a lot of times, you'll end up with twice as much money to invest. So instead of investing $1 million because you have debt that you can add, you actually get to invest up to $2 million. And so you get because the government's investing half, right? You're investing half, the government's investing half. In the stock market, you're investing 100%. It's that simple. So you invest in real estate, oil and gas, energy, agriculture, you're investing half of the money, the government's investing half the money. If you invest in the stock market, you're investing all the money. I'll give you a simple number, okay? So I'll start with, okay, let's say you are taxed versus you're not taxed on the investment return. We're not even talking about the deduction going in. If you had $10,000 and you invested it at 10% for 30 years and you paid a 40% tax rate, you'd have roughly $60,000 after 30 years. If you paid a 0% tax rate, you'd have almost $200,000 after 30 years.
Oh, that's like more than 3 times more.
It is. It's like 3.5 times more. Now the difference gets bigger when you talk about the deduction going in. If you get a deduction going in, that's just not paying tax on it. Okay. But if you get a deduction going in, the difference is like between 300,000 and 40 million after 30 years. The difference is so big that I can't count that high. It's so big. So truly what it tells you is how much taxes are stealing from your life when you're not doing what you could be doing from an investing standpoint and a tax strategy standpoint.
For the private sector investors, so if they're new, they try to take the mindset from the stock market perspective. Let's say, okay, I invest in, let's say, a real estate or like a small business. I just invest first and then think about the tax problem. But that's not really how it's supposed to be. Like when you invest, you have to think about the tax problem in advance because you have to plan the whole year until the time that you pay tax, and then you're starting to plan, that is too late. I think you give a very good, I would say, example, or from your experience, how you plan tax for Robert Kiyosaki. You always emphasize that. But try to educate the new private market investors. How do you even think about planning? What questions do they need to ask their tax advisor in terms of investing in private market?
Well, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with, instead of what questions you need to ask the tax advisor, what questions should your tax advisor be asking you? Okay, because probably what I'm best known for saying is if you want to change your tax, you have to change your facts. Okay, which means that I can't change my facts in April for the prior year. I have to change my facts in January, February, March, April. I have to change my facts every single day. And if I'm changing my facts, then what happens is I end up with a lower tax liability. Okay, so for example, let's say that I'm investing in real estate and I drive every day, I go out and visit one of the properties. Okay, well, that first drive of the day and the last drive home is called a commute, and you don't get to deduct it. For most people, that's probably 50% of their driving. However, if you had a home office, I changed my facts. And so my first drive of the day is from my kitchen to my office, okay, 30 feet from my kitchen to my office. And my last drive of the day is from my office to my kitchen. Then all of a sudden I don't have any commute. And so now instead of say 50% or 60% of my car being deductible, 100% of my car is deductible. So really what you're looking for in a tax advisor is how do I do it and how do I prevent it? They're do it and prevent it type of tax advisors, right? There are a lot of tax advisors. What they want to do is they want to prevent you from ever having an IRS audit, and because they don't ever want to deal with the IRS. What you're looking for is a tax advisor that's going to say, well, you want to know how you can do it. So I don't want to know if something's deductible. I want to know how to make it deductible. So I've just never met an entrepreneur. We work solely with entrepreneurs with our tax advisors. And I've never met an entrepreneur who wants to know what they can't do. They want to know how to do what they want to do, tax free, right? And so you want a tax advisor who will actually, there's an old joke, it's a very bad joke, but there's an old joke, Joy, in the accounting world, that if you ask a really good accountant, okay, tell me what's 2 + 2, the answer is, what would you like it to be?
That's a very good joke. Oh my God.
And that's how a good tax advisor is. Okay, I want to do this. Okay, great. If that's what you want to do, here's what you need to do in order to accomplish your objective. Anything can be deductible, but you have to decide, do I want to? For example, I can make my family vacation deductible to me, but do I want to spend 4.5 hours a day doing business? I may not. So I choose not to make it deductible, but at least now I have a choice. And I think a tax advisor's most important job is to give you a choice.
Robert Kiyosaki、川普，甚至是 Warren Buffett，他们充分理解了这个概念，才能达到今天这个财富等级。那这就是为什么有些人他不交税，或者说交的税与他们的这个财富相比是非常非常小的一部分。今天 Tom 这个背后的操盘手就来亲自跟我们解释一下，他是用什么样的逻辑让你们的富爸爸不交税的。
Why do the insider big investors use debt so much? Let's say like Robert Kiyosaki is known for having 1.2 billion debt, and why is he not panic about that? Why does he like it so much? I'm sure there's your effort in there, so explain it.
I appreciate that question so much, Joy. That is a really good question. So I always explain this in terms of a financial statement. Now there are two really basic financial statements: your profit and loss, or your income statement, and your balance sheet, right? Assets and liabilities. So if you think of what's the purpose of an expense in a business? The purpose of an expense is to make more money, right? It's to generate income. In a business, you don't spend money on casual things. You spend it because you want to make money, right? So that's the purpose of an expense. Then you go, okay, but what's the purpose of an asset? Well, the purpose of an asset is to make money over and over again, right? An asset, the only difference between an expense and an asset in a business is how long the cash flow continues. That's the only difference between expense and an expense. It's going to continue for less than a year. In an asset, it's going to continue for more than a year. Now, here's the big question, which is the answer to your question. What's the purpose of a liability? And the purpose of a liability is to buy an asset. That is the purpose of a liability. So here's the conclusion that I draw from that. If I'm only using liabilities to buy assets, and I'm only buying assets that will produce income, don't I want as much debt as possible? Because if I don't, here's the rule on debt. If you're afraid of the debt, it's because you don't trust the asset.
Debt is just the bank is investing in you.
Right.
And then it's actually the bank's problem to think about what to do if this asset is not generating wealth, basically. So there's non-recourse and recourse loan, basically, that the bank can choose to lend it to you. And that's why you need a good reputation or a good team to give the bank a trust that they're going to invest in you with debt and then let you buy an asset that's going to make sure that eventually the bank make money.
Yeah. So let me explain a little bit the difference between recourse and non-recourse debt. Recourse means you have to pay it no matter what happens. Okay. It doesn't matter if you have the asset or not. You can give the asset back to the bank. You still owe the bank the money. Okay. So they can take it from your wages. Okay. They can take it from anything you've got. That's recourse debt. The bank will lend you recourse debt if they believe in you. Okay. Non-recourse debt is debt that only gets repaid from the asset. You're not personally liable for it. The bank lends you money lends non-recourse debt when they believe in the asset. Okay. It's not just believing in you. Now they believe in the asset. Well, why would they believe in the asset? Because you have proven that when you run that asset, when you buy a multifamily, say you buy a 200 unit apartment complex, that you're going to produce income almost every time. And you're never going to have a problem paying back the bank. And they're going, wait a minute. So if I'm the bank and that multifamily piece of real estate is worth $10 million, say, and I lend $6 million, worst that can happen is I get back a $10 million asset and I only paid $6 million for it. So the bank's looking at it as, hey, that's a good deal. Now, when the bank loans like 70 or 75%, they've got a lot of faith in order to do that. They've got to have a lot of faith, both in you and in the asset and where it's located, all of the fundamentals of it, in order to lend that money on a non-recourse basis.
That goes back to another question. So depends on what your action is, you will get taxed differently. So for a lot of the investors out there, they may not be able to completely actively invest in the private market. They may be working with some firm, or they may be working with some team to get the passive return. So how does it tax differently? And from government making those rules, why would it make this kind of action return better than the other?
Well, it basically comes down to amateur investors versus professional investors. The government wants to subsidize professional investors. They don't want to subsidize amateur investors.
How do you define amateur and professional?
An amateur investor is someone who does it casually. Here's how I identify an amateur investor. An amateur investor makes a new decision every time they invest. A professional investor makes a decision once and just applies that decision over and over again to every investment. So if you look at the best investor in the world, Warren Buffett, you can actually follow, if you look at how he invests the same way every single time. He made a decision years and years ago, literally 80 years ago. He made a decision on how he was going to invest, and he just applies that decision over and over and over again. He does not, every once in a while, he'll fall off and he'll do something that's not his normal, and he loses money. He's lost literally billions of dollars by going away from his strategy. The most important thing is you find a strategy that works for you and you keep at it. That's what a professional investor does. The government wants you to be a professional investor. So they'll give you the reward. They'll give you a better reward if you're a professional investor than if you're a casual investor.
I was just actually doing a research on Warren Buffett's the deal that he did with Capital City. Cap Cities merged the ABC. So that was actually very fascinating. That's a private market deal. It just looked like it's a public market deal. So from a private perspective, like he asked Cap Cities to issue like 3 million shares. So he can buy that right away at the whatever price that is, like 172.5. And what's the tax benefit over there for him to do something like that, even though people think it's a stock market guy?
No, there's no tax benefit. So he's doing it purely from an investment benefit. There's really no special tax benefit there.
So let's say when he exit, this is the part when he exit, how does the tax work on his side? Does he keep the money in the company? Like if you're his tax advisor, how would you advise him to keep the?
Well, he doesn't normally exit. So he likes to he likes to run companies. This is why I think I hear financial planners say they invest like Warren Buffett. I'm going, you don't have a seat on the board of directors, so you do not invest like Warren Buffett. Exactly. He always wants a seat on the board of directors. Okay. He wants to be able to influence the company. He's investing in the business itself. He's not investing in the stock. Now, once in a while he does, like Apple, he invested in Apple, he invested as an outside investor. But he believed in it so much that he put an enormous amount of money in. Now he sold that last year, but he put a lot of money into Apple. Normally he's putting money into something like a Home Depot, something that pays dividends, right? Because he wants the cash flow. Now remember, dividends are only taxed like capital gains. So they're taxed at a maximum rate of 20% or 24% if you add the net investment income tax. Capital gains are taxed at a maximum rate of 24%. So he's not investing at something that's going to be taxed at 40%. He's investing at something that's going to be taxed at half that. And he normally leaves his money in the investment. He only gets out when he sees like, well, we're really at a high point and I need to sell, I need to liquidate. He has an enormous amount of cash sitting on hand right now.
He has Berkshire Hathaway as a shell, so he does not really get the money back to his pocket.
Yeah, he's not taking the money out. Oh, he drives an old car and he has an old house. I mean, that guy does not spend money.
And also, if he really needs the money, he can always borrow against whatever the asset, right?
That's right. Because debt is not taxable.
Right. This is the part a lot of investors don't know, that tax, it can be saved if you don't take the money out of the whatever asset that you have. You can just borrow against it. So what's the difference between, let's say, I have a $1 million asset, I exit that deal, and then I have a bunch of cash in my hand, versus I borrow against it?
Well, the difference is you're paying capital gains tax if you sell it, and you're not paying capital gains tax if you borrow it. And the reason that's true is because you are going to have to pay that back sometime. It might be after you die, but at some point it has to be paid back. So it's not your money. It's really somebody else's money, like the bank's money. And you've just borrowed it for a period of time. And that's why it's not taxable. But this is why I talk about in Tax Your Wealth, the concept of buy, borrow, die, right? You buy an asset, you borrow from it. When you die, all the tax goes away. So then you never pay tax at all.
另外一个更有争议的问题就是为什么我跟 Tom 都觉得川普这种地产大亨竟然还在交税，肯定是哪里出现了一些问题。而 Tom 呢，在这个川普的税表上面又观察到了点什么呢？
So this is what always get myself in trouble is the Trump's zero tax, because Trump is a big real estate guy. Like everybody knows that.
Yep.
So when Trump is saying like, I don't pay tax, everybody's like, why can you not pay tax? Like, to me, it's like, how much tax is he paying? He's still paying tax? Oh, that maybe he needs to get Tom as a tax advisor or something. Like, why is he still paying anything?
Well, so I looked at his tax returns when they were illegally released. And he didn't pay any tax. And the reason he didn't pay any tax, he would have had to have the worst tax advisor in the world to pay tax. He was so heavily invested in real estate.
My point.
He would have had to really Now, here's what's interesting though. So they released the tax returns through 2020. Because of a law change, he signed into law in 2017. In 2021, my expectation was he probably paid $4 million in tax in 2021. And just based on what I saw in 2020 and before, because the law changed. What happened is that he was making a lot of money from interest income.
Oh, okay.
And interest income now can no longer be offset 100% by real estate. So he probably paid some tax in 2021. Now he probably didn't pay any in 2022, but he probably paid some in 2021. But that was because you do have to pay attention to the technical rules. So it's good to have a basic understanding, but you need an advisor who understands all the rules.
大家是不是很好奇，但又不太好意思问？就是说，这个 Tom 这种顶尖的税务策略师，他在给他的客户设计投资策略的时候是怎么个逻辑？那从哪儿先下手？
I ask him, what are you trying to achieve? What do you want? What do you want? What's your dream? We actually have software for this, but the very first step in the software is to help you identify what your number is. What are you trying to achieve there? Because if I know what you're trying to achieve and I know where you are today and I know how long what your target is as far as how much time it takes, I can tell you what your rate of return needs to be. I can pinpoint your rate of return. If I pinpoint your rate of return, then we can go into, okay, well, what type of investing is that? What type of investing? For example, there's really 3 types of investing. You can invest at the retail level. That's like the stock market. It's also like a real estate investment trust, a REIT, right? That's retail investing. The public offering. Then you can invest at the wholesale level. That's a private offering. That's what, if you're investing, say, in a syndication, but you have to be an accredited investor for that. Or you can invest directly, right? You can actually go buy your own real estate. You can build your own business. The rate of returns double at each level. So if you go from retail to wholesale, and if at retail you were getting 7%, you should get 14% at wholesale. And if you go to the actual factory level or the development level, you should get 28%. So that doubles every time. So if you actually figure out, okay, here's where I want to be, and it's going to take let's say a 12% return to get there. Well, you're not going to do that in the retail market. So you've got to at least be in the wholesale market. But if it's going to take a 30% return, you can't do that in the wholesale market. You're going to have to do that where you're going to build your own assets.
You already put tax in the calculation already when you say like 12% or 30%, right?
Correct. You cannot get where you want to go if you're paying high taxes. It's almost impossible.
Like how specific does it need to be?
It needs to be very specific. I want to know, are you trying to leave all your money to your kids? Do you want to do charity? Do you want to spend a lot of money? What do you want? Because there's really 3 aspects that I'm looking for. First question is, I want to know, how do you make your money? Second of all, I want to know, how are you going to invest your money? Now, most people don't know the answer to that. So that's where we get into that whole wealth strategy. The third one is, what are you going to do with your money when you die? Because that has a tax impact as well. Okay. And an income tax and an estate tax. So you have 2 different taxes for when you're talking about what are you going to do with your money when you die. So you really need to look at everything. It's a holistic view of your world. So we've got to look at all of that. What's even your relationship with your children? What's your relationship with your spouse? Does your spouse have children that aren't your children? Do you want to give them money or not? There's so many complexities to it that you have to take a very macro view, as you would say. You have to take a very macro view, because if you don't, you're going to miss something.
总结一下哈，那这一期咱们聊了为什么大家想要成为真正的投资人，第一步先要摆脱这个交税光荣这心态哈。那交税没有什么光荣或者不光荣的，税法呢就是政府用来调节社会资源分配的一种方式。而且呢，最初这个税法也是只有战时才会征收的，但是过了100年哈，经历了几代人以后，交税的这个意义在普通人的认知里面就被塑造成了一种为集体做贡献的概念。但是如果你想要成为真正的投资人的话，税法就是最直接的投资指南。现在川普的策略走的是共和党一直主张的这个 trickle down economics 这个概念哈，给大企业减税，让制造业回归美国，因为美国企业在美国之外能够享受到的这个税务福利是要高于在美国本土的。那所以如果说川普想要成功通过税务刺激制造业回归的话呢，对于投资人来说，美国国内的制造业就是一个可以关注的方向。那我们说到了这个投资人的话题哈，那就出现了这么一个问题。那从政府角度上来说，他们想要的投资人是什么样的呢？ Tom 给的定义呢，就是说首先哈，这些人他愿意不断的去主动的寻求机会，而且直接参与到生产层面的投资。因为一个国家的经济实力是由能够生产出的商品和服务的价值来决定的。那所以政府鼓励加入到生产端的人，惩罚参与到消费端的这个人，这逻辑呢就非常合理。 那这也就是为什么直接参与到项目投资的投资人，无论这个项目大小，永远都会有更高的税务优势。也就是说，政府会帮助生产端的投资人分担投资风险，成为一种来自政府的投资杠杆。那每年都会获得大幅度减免的这个赋税呢，从长期来看，对于这些投资人来说呢，就会形成非常明显的复利效应。那如果再可以取得银行的信任拿到这个 non-recourse loan， 哪怕是这个项目出现了意外，那也不会追溯到个人资产上面，这个就是银行在帮投资人承担风险。那不过这个对于投资团队的信誉是有一定要求的。为什么呢？因为从银行的角度上来说借给你钱就是一种投资行为，银行看的不只是项目本身，还要看是谁在运营这项目。那这就是为什么像这个 Robert Kiyosaki 这种投资人能够稳稳的背着12亿美元的债务，因为这几十年的经验积累呢，他有这个信誉去拿到这么多的贷款。从我们的角度上来看呢，是12亿美元的债务，但是从银行的角度上来看呢，他就是投资给了 Robert Kiyosaki 12个亿。最后呢，我也让 Tom 透露了一下他在帮投资人设计策略的时候，都是从什么样的角度去切入的，看是不是能够给我们一些启发。那 Tom 的方式呢，就是他会从每个人的这个生活层面出发，去了解每个人的现状，而且不只是这个资产现状还有个人生活的这个现状，最终想要达到的目标是什么。那这个就涉及到像这个资产保护遗产税之类的这些东西那这些宏观的问题弄清楚了之后呢，然后再去思考到底在哪个领域哪个层级的投资类别能够最好的实现投资人的目标。那我觉得这不只是 Tom 接触到的这些上层的投资人需要思考的，那其实呢，我们每一个人都应该从这个角度上面去思考自己的这个投资规划。那因为说到底只从现实层面去想，为什么我们没有过上自己想要的生活的话呢，那这是条死胡同。想要改变生活现状，那必须改变行为，想改变行为必须要先改变思维，想改变思维就得先扩容自己脑子里面的信息储备。那我希望我这期影片呢，给大家扩容了那么一点儿。阿基，哎，全是你的毛。